we can talk now to Lord Ricketts, the former UK National Security Advisor who joins us in the studio. Great to have you with us. How optimistic are you that firstly the ceasefire deal will get fully signed off, will get over the line, and secondly that it will prove lasting?
I mean, it's a precious moment of opportunity. Of course, we all want it to work for the hostages and their families, for the suffering people of Gaza. But my goodness, it's fragile and very, very difficult. We've seen even today the difficulty of getting it over the line with the Israeli cabinet. I think probably the first phase of it will work. That seems to have been pretty fully negotiated between the two sides, which will allow some hostages to be released and some Palestinian prisoners get the humanitarian aid flowing in. But beyond that, I'm more sceptical, because the second phase, it's not really even negotiated yet. And there are some massive issues there which haven't really been faced.
I mean, it feels to me that this, so often with conflicts, there's just no thought given to what happens next, like the political solution. There doesn't seem to be much talk about who could be running Palestine, who could be in charge, any talk of moving towards a two-state solution, even if that's something that Israel would agree with. It feels difficult, doesn't it?
I think that's exactly right. For example, I don't think it's yet agreed that Israeli forces will pull out of the whole of Gaza in phase 2. Who is going to maintain law and order? Because the humanitarian community say we've got the aid, but it's being looted by gangs at the moment. So if Israeli forces pull back and there's no law and order there, then there won't be humanitarian support. And then there is this massive issue of reconstruction. Hundreds of billions of dollars are going to have to be found. It'll have to come from the wealthy Gulf Arab countries, I think. But they will expect some kind of commitment to a Palestinian state at the end of the process. So all these big, difficult issues that have been there for decades, they have not been eased at all by this war. Let's hope that at least the humanitarian situation can be improved. But I must say, I think there's an awful lot of risk that it could not go beyond the first phase.
Can I ask you about the role of Donald Trump? Because obviously Joe Biden is saying, look, this is my deal, I designed it. But surely the fact that it's been signed off literally just before Donald Trump enters the White House, I mean, that can't be a coincidence.
No, I mean, I think both things are true. I think the hard yards have been done by Joe Biden, particularly Antony Blinken. This deal was basically cooked by May last year. But what Trump has done is he's pushed Netanyahu over the line. And I think the unpredictability of Trump, I don't think Netanyahu wanted to risk it. So he did the final push to get him at least into phase 1. So in a way, both can take some credit for that.
It's interesting with Donald Trump, as you say, people don't want to risk it, the kind of unpredictability of it. I mean, are we seeing that in Ukraine as well, do you think?
Yes, I think we are. I think the very fact that he is so unpredictable is a new factor that people have to factor in. It's interesting that he stopped talking about solving the Ukraine problem on day one, which he used to say. I think as he gets closer to actually being in the White House, he's having to take that more seriously. But as you were hearing in your interview with Keir Starmer, I think Western leaders have got a real role to play to convince him that if he wants to end this war but also look strong, he's got to do it in a way that is with Zelensky, not done to Zelensky, and preserves Ukraine's right to decide its own security future.
How do you think Keir Starmer's going to get on with Donald Trump?
Well, politicians are pragmatists, and I think the fact that they're both in office, both relatively recently elected, they'll make it work. I think at the end of the day, they are both perfectly capable of having a working relationship. The issues are too big and too important for the personnel things to get in the way.
Just as we've been talking, we've had a little bit of breaking news coming in from Israel that I will get you to respond to, if that's OK. So as we've been speaking, the Israeli National Security Minister, Ben-Gvir, has just said in a press conference that he will resign from the government if the Gaza ceasefire deal is approved. So that coming in from the press conference now. I mean, is that a surprise? Is it a problem?
It's not a surprise, I don't think. I mean, this has been a divisive issue in the Israeli cabinet ever since the start of the war. There have been two, particularly the far-right ministers in Netanyahu's cabinet who have been threatening to do that. That's been part of the reason, I think, why Netanyahu has not done a deal up to this point. So it's a price he has to pay to get the deal over the line. But I think if he's prepared to go with it in the way he has, it means he's factored that in. And he thinks that his government can survive without these two ministers.
So he can get away with a couple of resignations?
I think they were inevitable, given the very, very radical stance that the two have taken on the war in Gaza.
Yeah, it is. I guess it does show the difficulty, the kind of political situation in Israel of getting to any kind of peace deal as well.
It's very, very, very divisive, definitely.
How do you think, I mean, I guess there's not much that we can really do from the UK standpoint to kind of get the ceasefire locked in or to do our bit. Do you think there's much that we can really get to there?
I think we can play a real role in thinking about the next stage. The humanitarian work. There's an enormous amount of humanitarian work to do. Britain has a good record in that. We have a lot of very able people. I think we should be part of that. And I think also getting the sides to think about these longer-term issues, law and order, security, reconstruction. How can we build from this ceasefire, hoping it holds, to a lasting settlement that allows people to live in peace and stability together? That's been the challenge for decades. And the British have got a lot of experience, and I think we can be playing our part in that.
And I know I'm skipping around the world with you, but that's what I always will do if you're in this seat, because I do value your kind of expertise on this. But you were talking there about the role that Britain can play in the future in the Middle East. What is the kind of role that we can play in Ukraine? We obviously heard Beth Rigby there asking Keir Starmer about that.
Well, we've played a very distinguished role since the start of the Ukraine war. We've been probably the leading European country in supporting Ukraine militarily and economically. And Keir Starmer's been in Kiev signing this 100-year partnership. 100-year partnership, that's quite an undertaking for a government. But it shows the commitment in the long term to support Ukraine. I do not think that Keir Starmer was talking about British peacekeeping forces. Beth was putting that to him. Peacekeeping forces, I mean, that's a very, very demanding thing to ask of a country. Putting your forces between the Russians and the Ukrainians, potentially willing to fight to keep them apart, that's not the role I think that British forces would play. I could see perhaps that UK would deploy some forces in a training role, for example, to have some people actually in Ukraine, but not at risk of being drawn into fighting. All that's to be said for the future. I think the key thing now is that the UK can play a leadership role, thought leadership, in how to bring Putin and Zelensky to the table. We are going to have a negotiation, I think, in the course of this year. The Trump effect can be useful there, but it's got to preserve Ukraine's independence. It's got to make sure that they don't have the territory they're occupying as their own sovereign territory.
Just finally, because it feels like this is a thorny problem here. You know, Ukraine say, OK, well, what's going to stop Russia invading again? How can we have protection? Russia say, if Ukraine join NATO, if we get peacekeeping forces that are countries of NATO near our border, that's a provocation. So how do these things become squared?
Well, Keir Starmer and others have been talking about peace through strength, and I think that means reinforcing the Ukrainian armed forces, making sure they've got the capacity to stand on their own feet, and at least starting the process of bringing them towards NATO. I don't think they're going to join NATO anytime soon, but at least saying that they have the right to be members of NATO and working more and more closely. After all, they're the most battle-hardened force in Europe. NATO can learn a lot from them. So we can try and make them as spiny a hedgehog as possible to make sure that Russia doesn't want to go and try and eat them. I think that's the best we can do from the outside.
Yeah, make sure those prickles are sharp enough.
Very sharp.
Thank you very much indeed, Lord Ricketts. Great to have you on the programme this evening.
Thank you.